All right, welcome to this webinar, this Kemin webinar. We have Dr. Stuart Richer on the line. We're very excited to have him join us. The webinar is lutein and blue light protection. And Stuart has a wealth of experience, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want everyone to know that you're able to ask questions. Just go to the Q&A box. We received a lot of questions already, and then we will have one poll during the webinar. So we'll go ahead and we'll get started. And Stuart, on behalf of Kemin Health, please take it away.
Thank you so much. So the first slide is the title slide, and I've been working at the Department of Veterans Affairs Medical Center in North Chicago, Illinois, for about 40 years. I hold a couple of academic appointments at medical schools and 2 at optometry schools. And my next slide is the disclosure slide. And on the disclosure, I just want to thank Kemin Health because they actually funded the lutein antioxidant supplementation trial in 2004. This was published before the macular generation trials came out from the National Institute of Health. It somewhat preceded this, the importance of lutein, and that made a huge difference to the public, and also that had that information earlier about the benefits of lutein and also to, my career. So I do want to thank Kemin. I've also worked on zeaxanthin vision function study. I know that there is OptiSharp as part of the lineup for products that Kemin has, and so that is also becoming important as well. Done some work at Illinois Society Prevent Blindness. I've done some work on anti-aging. That's on my website on red wine extract. I'm also currently involved with a night vision study, which is very, very exciting. We have the results for ARVO 2020, and we're writing the manuscript. I've been a consultant for some companies. So I'm looking at the third slide where we're showing a really beautiful picture of the visible spectrum. And what's not appreciated is that sunlight is much, much broader than we think. It actually encompasses 300 nanometers to 2,000 nanometers, which is the wavelength of light. But today, what's happening in modern societies is we're being constricted on both ends. So we're being constricted in the violet light because we're starting at 420, and we're going out to 630. And the reason this is happening is because of these blue LED efficiencies. So just take that into account. And I'm going to be talking about this a little bit. Just the take-home point is that we definitely need that sunlight, especially during a time of viral crisis. We need to be getting the sunlight to make vitamin D in the middle of the day, and we need some exposure to that based on your skin tone. And we also need to charge up our bodies. So we get about 20% more energy by being out in the sunlight on the ultraviolet end and on the ultraviolet end and also on the red end. So I want you to kind of gain some info from this lecture. Buying light bulbs is no longer easy, even for an optometrist. And I can tell you that most optometrists, most ophthalmologists, they'll go into a store and they're as clueless about what light bulbs to buy as the rest of us. It's a complex topic. I've studied it the last couple of years. I'm going to try and condense it down just a little bit so you have some information. So the next slide is the one on the humble 100-watt incandescent light bulb. Now, on the lower left is what's called the spectrophotometric curve, and that is showing the energy emitted from this light bulb from 400 to 700, and which is what the basic visible spectrum, visible light, is considered. And you can see it's heavily weighted in red. This bulb, unfortunately, was banned in Europe in 2009. It was banned globally in 2014. It is a very nice light. It's flattering. It throws off a lot of heat, which is good in the winter. It has, however, a short lifespan, and it does indeed induce sleep, which is very good. And it's hospitable. It's flattering light. Women love to be photographed under this type of lighting, this soft white lighting. And it has a lot of infrared to charge up the body, to create ATP in the body. But this is not the type of lighting we have today. So let's go to the next issue. The next issue is the type of lighting we've had. We've had fluorescent lighting for a long time. That has emitted a lot of blue light, but we really have a lot more blue light from the LEDs, and we have it from all the devices that we're using today, from phones to iPads to the televisions. If the color temperature is not set correctly for the age of the patient, or the consumer on the television set, they get more blue than they need. Now, this is going to be highly dependent on the duration of the light exposure, the screen distance, and the dose of the light, but it's also dependent on something called macular pigment optical density, which is the amount of density protective pigment that is within the eye to protect us from this light. So we know from in vitro cell studies, we have increased reactive oxygen species leading to mitochondrial damage. This is highly charged oxygen derivatives. These alter protein expression or activation of the inflammatory pathway, which is called NF-kappa beta, and enzymes, caspase. And then we have decreased cell viability and severe photoreceptor damage. So we know through in vitro studies, dose response, that this is happening to the cells. In animal studies, we know that cumulative blue light exposure below the level causing acute damage results in photochemical retinal damage. All right, so I'm going to the next slide. Cece, you with me? So the effects on human health and the environment on fauna and flora of systems using light-emitting diodes has been studied. So there's actually been a conference on this in 2019, the French Agency for Food, Environmental and Occupational Health Survey. And what to them was the most worrying issue was the concern of the toxic effect of blue light and the risk of glare. Blue light is well known for its harmful and dangerous effects on the retina, resulting from a cellular oxidative stress situation. We know with macular degeneration from the Wisconsin study, that basically, Beaver Dam study, that basically people who go outside as youngsters for any amount of time, especially if they're light pigmented with Fitzpatrick 1 skin or 2, very light skin, or they have red hair, particularly those, and they're unprotected without caps, they are twice as likely to develop macular degeneration over time. So we do know this for decades, that blue light is toxic to the retina. There's an aggravating effect on macular degeneration, and that has been reported in vivo, in vitro, and epidemiological studies. Now, if we go to the next slide, and we look at the new scientific data, what it's really zeroing in on who's really most affected by this, and I'll show you why. So children and adults exposed from a very early age to screens constitute a particularly susceptible population group. And that is merely, it's from a couple of reasons. But the lens, first of all, they're heavy users of blue light, but their lens is relatively clear, and I'm going to show you a picture of that. So it is transmitting more of the high energy blue part of the spectrum to the retina. Now the macula contains these sun-loving pigments, xanthophyll pigments, yellow pigments. We've known about this since the 1860s, okay? That when you look into the eye with an ophthalmoscope, you can actually see this yellow center pigment that's protecting the most important real estate of the eye. And the most important real estate of the eye is the fovea. It's 2 to 3 degrees where the cones are tightly packed. And that allows us to have acute vision, and it allows us to have color vision. And it's something that most other life forms don't have, okay? For instance, your dog doesn't have a fovea, okay? It just has a flat retina. But the human retina has the center 2 to 3 degree area, the most important real estate of the eye. This is the miracle mile of the retina. This is Rodeo Drive and so forth. This is Times Square. It's the very, very center of the retina. It's the most important part, and the one that we have to protect in macular degeneration. Now, Cece, are we on slide 9, LED photobiology? I was going to take just a second.
Yes, we're there, Stuart. Keep going.
Wonderful. I'm glad. I know I apologize for the technical difficulties. I do a lot of these Zoom conferences, and sometimes they don't work when you need them to work, but I'm glad you can all hear me. This is a slide I put together on LED photobiology. You're not going to see this slide anywhere. It has not been published yet, but it basically is showing the pros and the cons of modern lighting. On the pro side of these LED light bulbs is that they're 90 to 95% energy efficient, and their long life In other words, they'll last up to 50,000 years. That's on the blue side. The con of this is they have an aggressive blue portion of the spectrum that leads to foveal damage that can disrupt the circadian rhythm and promote free radicals. Secondly, it also lacks the red and infrared for cellular rejuvenation and repair. And it provides an amount of stress from digital to digital way that the light is emitted, much like the older fluorescent lights. The fluorescent lights are not good for people with migraines or epilepsy, for instance, because they can trigger these medical conditions. Well, to a certain extent, depending on the LED, it can have an amount of flicker. LEDs also do have a little bit of lead, arsenic, nickel, and copper in them, okay? And one of the things that people should realize is that when these are put into street lights, they've been increasing light pollution we've been getting earlier spring, and that was published in Science Advances. So let's go to slide 10. Why is lutein so important, lutein and blue light? Because modern indoor lighting, cell phone pads and TVs and computer displays all emit this bad blue radiation increasingly, last several decades. There's 3 ways to block this bad light, and it's not a simple explanation, but I'm going to try and make it as simple as possible. 1, we have the aging of the human lens that's occurring. That's protective. 2, we have spectacle blue blocking tints. That may seem to be protective, but in my opinion is not as good as lutein and zeaxanthin, building up, or choice 3, curtain number 3, dietary ocular carotenoids, I believe, are the best, and I'm going to explain that. Of the 3 methods, dietary ocular carotenoids uniquely improve visual performance, and they're improving not visual performance, but brain performance, and we're not talking about that today, but it improves actually brain function through non-optical biological mechanisms while protecting the desirable circadian rhythm mediated good turquoise blue. And there's a synergy with external sunglasses when used intelligently. So let's go to slide 11. On slide 11, we see the human crystalline lens, and this is from my thesis advisor at UC Berkeley, Dr. Tony Adams, okay? And this protects humans from blue light, okay? And you can see it's 6 months in the upper left-hand corner, and then you can see a middle-aged patient or person at 50 years of age, and then you see somebody who's 90 years of age, in fact, has only 1/3 the light coming to the retina, okay? But the quality of that light is poor and blue. And in fact, when you take out the cataract in a patient this age, they get an emotional and psychological benefit from the cataract removal because their circadian rhythms are now balanced. They're getting some blue light in the morning. It's waking them up. Their emotions, their intelligence, their optimism is all enhanced through cataract surgery. So cataract surgery is not just about visual acuity. It can often be about improving physiology. Now, if we go to slide 12, it's showing the macular pigment is protecting the center 2 to 3 degrees, okay? But look what's happening to UVB. It's absorbed. UVB is the high energy you need it to make vitamin D, for instance. You get it from midday sunlight. That's being absorbed by the cornea, and UVA is being absorbed by the lens, hence why we get cataracts, is we get a lot of UVA. And by the way, lutein and zeaxanthin are both found in the lens and have been both found to decrease the risk of developing a cataract in epidemiological studies about 20%. So if you have higher macular pigment, which translates to higher pigment within the eye, within the lens of the eye, and also within the brain, you are actually getting, your risk reduction is about 20% for cataract. Now, visible light, here's the window. You see the 400, that's the blue light from these LEDs. That is, and it looks, I apologize, I don't have a curve of the LED, but it looks pretty much opposite of the tungsten light. So the visible light is actually getting to the retina. So there's a so-called window. Now, how do we protect ourselves from this? There's about 50 carotenoids in the diet. Lutein and zeaxanthin concentrate in the eye over 1,000 times what it is in the serum. Think about that, 1,000 times. There's 50 in the diet. There's actually about 850 in biology, 50 in the diet, about 20 in the bloodstream of these carotenoids, and then they concentrate in the very center of the most important real estate of the eye. Okay, but they also go to the brain, as I mentioned, where obviously they're not filtering light in the brain, but they're increasing neural efficiency. And so we find that they're increasing, especially for children. Now, the recommendations in the United States right now are to eat 5 to 9 portions of vegetables and fruit. But how many people are doing it? You can see the states where this is happening. It's happening particularly in Oregon, California, and Vermont. But for the average American, they're only consuming 13% in fruit and 9% for vegetables. And that is extremely important because dark green leafy vegetables, for instance, avocados, things like this, have a lot of lutein in it. Therefore, sufficient protective lutein is not being consumed. And if we go to the next slide, Cece, which is slide 15, excessive bad blue is especially bad for the two important demographics. Young, because they no longer have the lens, right? So you can see on this graph, which is the transmission of the light versus wavelength on the x-axis, transmission on the y-axis, you see in the purple curve, traditional UV absorbing IOL, and then you see a 25-year-old, and then you see a 54-year-old. So you can see that this 25-year-old is transmitting 70% to the back of the eye, and the 54-year-old who's starting to develop a cataract is transmitting around 40 to 50%. So these are the groups. Let's go to the next slide to answer the poll question. So the answer is 92% of adults experience symptoms from the use of digital devices. But let's break it down. Let's look at adults. Let's look at children. So you can see adults are really suffering from this to quite an extent, and children are. So you can see blurred vision, very common. Headaches, very common. Dry eye from screen use because we don't blink as much when we're on a computer. And then eye strain because we have to have a lot of neuromuscular energy. So let's move on to the circadian rhythm, slide 17. And this is just showing that this blue-green turquoise light is controlled by our circadian rhythm. Now, when we go to the next slide, and let me go back to the slide 17, it's showing you everything is controlled by this daylight cycle. Now, on slide 18, we show 10% of neurons from the retina are extra foveal and help entrain the circadian rhythm. They're intrinsically active photosensitive ganglion cells, and they go to the interior of the brain and eventually to the pineal gland, and they regulate the daylight cycle. And so the important thing to realize is that lutein is not affecting this because these ganglions are outside the fovea, but sunglasses are. And some people who wear blue blockers all day, I'm going to the next slide, the lens market has embraced protection of bad blue by sometimes cutting off completely bad blue. But the problem is we need it in the morning to wake up. If we don't have it, we're going to have too much melatonin in our system, and we're going to be groggy in the morning if we're using these blue blockers early in the morning. So slide 19 or slide 20 is just a tribute to my friend, Dr. Dick Roberts, who passed away recently. And he had a patent on all of this, method of treating ocular disorders, products containing ocular antioxidant, including but not limited to lutein and zeaxanthin, used to protect the eye, and I'd say the fovea, from blue light and UV-induced damage. So he was way ahead of his time. And he also had the patent on certain refractive errors are more affected, astigmatism, hyperopia, and presbyopia, just because of the focus of where the eye is. So my last slide is this. I want to summarize why lutein and zeaxanthin are so important, because they're important for protection and performance. It builds higher macular pigment, protecting against blue light. It provides robust internal protection, complementing immediate external blue light protection, such as sunglasses. It maintains our circadian rhythms. It does not limit light transmission to the eye, which sunglasses do. And dietary lutein and zeaxanthin are proven in AREDS 2 for AMD and cataract. We didn't get into that, but there's superior visual performance and protection against blue light. And with that, I'll open up to questions, Cece. I'm sorry if I ran a few minutes late.
Problem. Hey, thanks, Stuart. Thanks for adjusting with the technical problems. We've got a lot of questions coming in, so we want to have time. I'll just read them to you. So the first question is, how long does it take to see improvements in your macular pigment once I start taking lutein and zeaxanthin?
That's a fantastic question. So the blood levels are going to increase anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, and then you're going to start to see maybe early changes in the retina because the lutein has to eventually make its way to the retina. So there are intermediary steps, which I won't go into, but eventually after 2 to 3 months, you're going to start to build up pigment. About 4 months, you're at a very nice level of pigment, and then you continue to increase the more lutein that you add to your diet. There is a sweet spot of 0.6 density units where 98% of all visual function is optimized. I know this because I work with the military, and that's what they want to achieve, 0.6 density units.
Okay.
Next.
Terrific.
Next.
Yeah. So a question on the type of supplement. Does it matter? Soft gel, tablet, liquid, etc.?
I think they're all good, Cece, but I think what we need to do is remember that the absorption is going to significantly be impacted if we have it with fat. So we need to have a little, you need to have it with a meal, or you need to have it with a little fat, and you'll dramatically, I think it's 4 times higher bioavailability when you take your lutein with fat.
Okay. That's a very helpful tip. All right, here's a question more for Kemin. I'll take this one. Can these products, Florigold, lutein, and OptiSharp zeaxanthin, be used in food products? And absolutely, they have been used in food and on the market. It's a great question because these benefits definitely can reach people through food as well as supplements. I will suggest for this question, I'll leave my email and I can provide graphs for those of you in the US. And the question also says, are there any other considerations? Certainly color would be something to keep in mind for Florigold's application in food. So maybe the flavoring and the naming would take into account the orange color of the carotenoid. But I'll leave my email. It's ceci.snyder, S-N-Y-D-E-R, @kemin.com. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any more questions, or such as for GRAS status of Florigold in the US. All right, going to the next one, Stuart. This one's for you. Considering the current situation of COVID-19, are there any points that you would bring up, such as increased screen time, that maybe customers or clients might want to consider?
You know, that's an excellent question. I think we're all doing more screen time. We have to watch our children because they are closer to the screen. They have more hours of use, and they're relatively unprotected because they don't have the density yet of their internal lens. So I said, yes, if lutein and zeaxanthin were important before, they're even more important during the crisis. And if you want to contact me about, because I've written a huge article about self-protection for our armed forces as far as COVID. It's not the subject of this lecture, but I can talk to that another time. Anyone wants to contact me.
Okay, terrific. What about current technology options for measuring macular pigment optical density in the eye? I guess briefly, well, I know there's a lot out there, so.
Yeah, you know, the gold standard is heterochromic flicker photometry, and this is basically passing 2 different discrete wavelengths of light into the eye, and basically it's cut with a rotating filter, and one needs to detect, so that's the hetero, since there's 2 wavelengths of light. Flicker, because what you're doing is spinning a wheel, basically, or some type of an electrical system that just flickers, you know, changes the amount of time, so both stimuli are flickered. And then you can change the energy of the blue portion, which is retarded by the pigment, the yellow pigment. You can change that and adjust it. The patient adjusts it typically so they see no flicker. And then that translates to the amount of pigmentation into the eye. So it's a visual psychophysical measure. I'd say about 1,000 of the 40,000 optometrists currently are equipped to do it. I think we're going to see other devices that are easier to use for the consumer in the near future.
Okay. All right, Stuart, maybe one more. We see we have a lot of questions coming in, and if they're not anonymous, it looks like most of you are not are submitting under your name. We can answer those after the webinar. I want to assure you that we're going to follow up and answer those questions. The last question, I'm not sure if you covered it or not, but this is a good closer. What dosage for adults for lutein and zeaxanthin do you recommend?
That's a great question. So I see a lot of patients, and Basically, I want them to have at least 6 milligrams of lutein in their diet, and most Americans only have about 1 milligram in their diet. So 6 milligrams for the average person without a risk profile, without a risk issue. And then for people who are at risk of having macular degeneration, we're seeing 10 to 12 milligrams being the preferred amount, because this is what has been used in the age-related eye disease study, the National Institute of Health study that was published in 2013, showing that when we have the higher risk of these carotenoids, we have a decrease in the risk of developing macular degeneration of about 25%, which is significant from a public health standpoint. So now I have to say I go to higher doses sometime if a person is on an acid blocker, if the person is and their digestive system is preventing the absorption of the lutein, if they are on, and other nutrients, and if they have a higher percent body fat. And many people in America have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and so they have a lot of fat, and lutein, before it gets to the retina, has to equilibrate in the fat tissue. So basically, it acts as a sink. So I'll go to 20 milligrams with somebody with a higher percent body fat or a higher BMI. And sometimes with higher, more complaints, I would go to a higher dose.
Okay. All right, Stuart, I'm showing my screen again here. So I just want to thank everyone on behalf of Kemin Health for joining us today for this webinar on blue light protection. Again, my email is ceci.snyder, S-N-Y-D-E-R, @kemin.com, and we are going to be happy to answer questions after the fact. Again, apologize for some of the technical difficulties. Stuart, we really appreciate your joining us today and your expertise. I know we've got another one coming here on the way, so we'll be putting information out about the next webinar. And then finally, I want to make sure everyone knows, if you register, that you will get an email with the recording of this webinar. And with that, we'll end the webinar today, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.